And that was very good for him. You know what I mean? And everybody was envious, as I would be naturally at the time. But in reality now, obviously, I wouldn't trade it with him. Rest in peace. You know, he's rather a nice, very mild gentleman.
The hills near Mulholland Drive felt like they'd stopped moving, frozen in that strange silence that falls right after everything changes. For weeks, that stretch of Hollywood seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something, anything, to break the tension. Headlines kept spinning, news anchors kept talking, and everyone had their own version of the truth. But one voice, the one that truly mattered, stayed missing. Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle vanished from the noise, slipping into quiet shadows while the rest of the industry tried to piece together what went wrong. Talk shows dissected every rumor, insiders whispered behind closed doors, and reporters filled screens with endless theories. The city buzzed with opinions, but from the top of the canyon, from one of Hollywood's most iconic figures, came nothing. No statement, no leak, no hint. Jack Nicholson, always unpredictable, stayed completely silent, and that silence spoke louder than any headline ever could. Jack never danced to anyone else's beat, and this time was no different. When he finally did decide to break the quiet, it wasn't on a red carpet or in front of flashing cameras. It happened exactly his way. Low-key, private, almost poetic. No lights, no fancy setup, just a recorder resting on a heavy wooden table in his sun-drenched living room. The late-day light stretched through the windows, spilling over old movie posters and fading photos, each one holding a story too wild to retell. That house wasn't just a home, it was a museum of his life. Jack leaned back in his chair, still rocking those dark sunglasses, not to hide, but because that's who he's always been. He looked thinner, older, the sharp lines of his face now deeper, carved by time and something heavier, something that still haunted him. He lifts his glass slowly.
So I was, and so were all the people I was working with, trying to do their best under the circumstances. And that's really all you need as a developing actor, is just to be trying to do it well. Real problems with him, and I don't really. There was a substitute male figure in the house. I have older sisters and married. And I would say throughout I've had a fairly easy life.
The ice clinking softly, as if keeping rhythm with his thoughts. The room is still, the kind of silence that carries weight. This isn't a press tour or a glossy Hollywood confession. It feels raw, personal, almost like the truth finally forcing its way out. When Jack starts to talk, his voice is gravelly, calm, like it's traveled through decades of memories to reach this moment. He says people love to talk about Rob, the legend, the director, the man behind Stand By Me and The Princess Bride. They laugh when they mention Meathead, and Jack chuckles, admitting they're not wrong. But that's only one side of the story. He leans forward, sets his glass down with a soft thud, and his tone shifts. What people don't understand, he says, is the real Rob. The deep thinker, the one who laughed loud and real, the kind of laugh that filled a room and made it feel alive. Then his voice drops lower. They don't know what it was like to stand by Rob when his world was coming apart from the inside. This isn't about a Hollywood icon lost in tragedy. It's about a father, a man who loved his son so completely, he couldn't see the danger that was creeping into his own circle. People keep circling back to the same haunting question. Did he see the signs and choose love anyway? Or did he miss them until it was too late? Jack doesn't claim to have the answers. He says what truly matters is that unshakable bond. The loyalty, the trust, the weight of standing beside someone long enough to see both their brilliance and their shadows. This story doesn't come from gossip blogs or half-true reports.
He was found late Sunday afternoon by his sister, Romy. Both parents were discovered having been stabbed. Nick was at the Conan O'Brien holiday party the night before, Saturday, December 13th. He was there with his father. He was acting erratic by all accounts, and he was loudly arguing with his father. So since there was blood found in the room, in the shower, in the bed, but there was none on him, he had perhaps the mental wherewithal to clean himself. He bought a Gatorade from a convenience store. He put his hands up when he was approached by the police.
It comes from the one man who lived close enough to feel every moment and stayed silent while the rest of the world filled in the blanks. Jack Nicholson didn't rush to explain, didn't chase cameras. He waited, and when he finally looked back, his memories didn't begin with red carpets or industry handshakes. It all started under pressure, inside one of the most intense courtroom scenes ever filmed. A Few Good Men, 1992. The tension was real, the stakes high, the energy electric. People forget that Rob Reiner wasn't just a director calling shots from behind the lens. He started as an actor, and that changed everything. Jack's gaze drifts past the recorder like he's watching the scene replay in his mind, frame by frame. That acting background gave Rob something special: empathy. He didn't treat actors like props or pieces on a board. He knew what it felt like to freeze mid-line, to face that paralyzing fear when the camera's rolling and the world's watching. Most directors stood back and observed. Rob stepped in with you. He didn't just guide a performance, he felt it. Jack explains that Rob didn't watch emotions unfold. He joined them. Every risk, every heartbeat, like it was his own. Then there was that scene, Colonel Jessup's explosive speech, the one that people still quote decades later. The words came from a young Aaron Sorkin, sharp, relentless, rapid-fire dialogue that could either soar or crumble depending on the rhythm.
Here at Conan's house alarmed the guests because it was so bizarre. One of the guests recalled Rob Reiner telling his son his behavior was
There was zero margin for error. Everyone on set knew it. Jack remembers the grind, take after take, different angles, fresh energy each time. Tom Cruise was kinetic, unstoppable, his fire bouncing off the walls. Jack, in contrast, was still, composed, letting the tension simmer until it was ready to detonate. And Rob, he let it breathe. That's what made the difference. Rob didn't cut the silence short. He didn't rush the art. He understood that sometimes the power wasn't in the words. It was in the pause between them. Between takes, Rob wouldn't deliver long speeches or throw out complicated direction. He'd step in close, lower his voice, and say something simple, something sharp that cut straight through the noise. He'd look Jack in the eye and remind him quietly that Jessup didn't think he was the villain. He believed he was the hero. That was the secret. Rob wasn't directing lines. He was directing belief. And that belief is what made the scene unforgettable. Jack says that's why the connection between them ran so deep. It wasn't built on fame or flattery, it was forged through pressure, through shared instincts. There's one moment he recalls that never made it into interviews or documentaries. After one brutal take, the crew stopped to reset the cameras. Jack stepped off to the side, taking a breath, cigarette in hand, and Rob walked over. No big gestures, no audience. Just two men standing in silence while the buzz of the set faded away. Rob didn't say much. He didn't have to. That quiet moment said more than words ever could. It was pure respect, the kind that doesn't need to be performed. That's the side of Rob few ever saw. The side built on unspoken trust, on understanding when to talk and when to just stand beside someone in the quiet. Jack pauses there, like he's still back on that set. He says Rob didn't rush him that day, didn't try to fill the silence. He just stood there with him for a full minute.
He looks like he's got a screw or an evil screw. So he was 32 years old. He was at a holiday party hosted by Conan O'Brien.
Tells NBC News that Nick allegedly interrupted a discussion involving comedian Bill Hader. After Bill told him it was a private conversation, Nick reportedly stood still and stared before, quote, storming off. E! News has reached out to representatives for Bill Hader for comment. 32-year-old Nick was arrested the next day for suspicion of murder and is currently being held without bail.
Reiner could face life in prison without the possibility of parole or even the death sentence.
Having the death penalty on the table is absolutely a bargaining chip. The prosecution is going to leverage that to try to get some sort of deal.
In a statement, the couple's two other children, Jake and Romy Reiner, said, "Word cannot even begin to describe the unimaginable pain we are experiencing. They weren't just our parents."
No cameras, no notes, no noise. Just two people who knew what it meant to carry the weight of a story that still hasn't finished telling itself. Rob finally spoke, calm and steady, like every word was carrying history. He shared something his father, Carl, once told him. The funniest people usually carry the deepest sadness, and the most dangerous ones are the ones absolutely sure they're right. That thought hit Jack hard. It wasn't just about Colonel Jessup. It was about belief itself, about how certainty can twist into something dangerous when it goes unchecked. Jack explains that yes, Rob was technically talking about the film, but there was something much bigger underneath it. It was a warning about human nature, the risk of never questioning your own choices, the danger of thinking you're always the hero no matter the cost. For a moment, the movie faded into the background. This wasn't about filmmaking anymore. It was about life. about power, ego, and how easily they blur. That's when Jack realized Rob wasn't chasing fame or applause. He was searching for truth, the kind that cuts past performance and lands deep in the heart. From that point on, their friendship was locked in solid. On paper, they were total opposites.
Very good for him, you know what I mean? And everybody was envious, as I would be naturally at the time. But in reality now, obviously, I wouldn't trade it with him.
Nick did not understand the nature and quality of his actions at the moment. So Nick will have to prove that he lacked a basic understanding of where he was, what was going on, what he was doing.
Rob was warm, approachable, deeply rooted in Hollywood legacy. The son of comedy royalty, comfortable wherever he went. Jack was the outsider, guarded, private, often choosing solitude over the spotlight. Yet somehow the two found a rhythm that made sense. They didn't do loud lunches or orchestrated photo ops. Jack says their friendship lived in quiet corners. Private dinners away from crowds, long late-night phone calls that drifted between deep talks and everyday jokes. They'd debate basketball, mostly the Lakers, tease each other about aging, talk politics, and then circle back to what mattered most: family. For Rob, family wasn't a category. It was his whole world. Jack's tone shifts when he talks about it, his face tightening just a little, like the memory still stings. He remembers the way Rob's eyes lit up whenever he mentioned his sons, Jake and Roy. He was proud of their independence, the way they carved their own lanes without leaning on his name. That pride was real, almost glowing. But when the conversation turned to Nick, everything grew heavier, not less loving, just different. Jack describes it as protective love, the kind that keeps you awake at night. You could feel the weight in Rob's voice whenever Nick came up. It wasn't control, it was worry, the kind only a parent who's seen too much of Hollywood could understand. Jack says he's seen this story play out 1,000 times. The kids of the famous trying to navigate the pressure that comes with it. The city can lift you up fast, but it can also swallow you whole if you're not ready. Money, attention, access, it all changes things. Too many yeses can twist reality before you even notice. Rob knew that. He and Michelle worked hard to build something normal in a world that wasn't. Family dinners, real vacations, showing up, not just in photos, but in presence. They tried to keep their kids grounded, to remind them what real life looks like outside the gates. And by all accounts, they did a lot right. They paid attention. They cared deeply. But Hollywood isn't just a town, it's a pressure cooker. Even the strongest families feel the heat. Even the most loving parents face moments they can't control. Jack says that's what haunts him most. The quiet kind of darkness that doesn't knock loud. It slips in slowly, through cracks you don't notice until it's already inside. He remembers that day like it's burned into his memory. He was home alone. The house was silent, too still. When the phone rang, sharp and relentless, cutting through the air like an alarm you can't turn off. It wasn't a publicist or an agent. It was a close friend, their voice trembling, barely holding together. Jack says that moment still replays in his head, the seconds before he fully understood what he was hearing. At first, your mind refuses to connect the words. It's too unreal, too heavy. He heard fragments. Rob, Michelle, the house, Nick, and then everything blurred. The words didn't make sense. They floated, scattered, like static that your brain refuses to process because it's too painful to believe. Jack describes it as falling. Not grief, not yet, but like being dropped into an empty void. Everything around you keeps moving, but you're stuck, frozen in disbelief. After he hung up, he walked outside to his deck overlooking Los Angeles. The city stretched out in front of him, glowing, alive, untouched. Cars moved, a helicopter passed overhead. The sun kept shining, like nothing had changed. And that's what hit him hardest. How the world doesn't stop, even when yours just did. That contrast. The stillness inside versus the noise outside was unbearable. Jack said that was the moment it all became real. The silence in his home was louder than anything he'd ever heard. It feels cruel, almost like a slap from life itself. The world doesn't pause for heartbreak. It doesn't even slow down. Jack didn't bother turning on the TV or scrolling through the noise online. He already knew what he'd see. Headlines twisting grief into spectacle, old photos dragged from archives, strangers dissecting pain they never earned the right to touch. He wanted no part of that circus. Instead, he stayed inside the quiet of his home. A silence now haunted by laughter that once filled it. His thoughts kept circling back to Michelle. His voice tightens when her name comes up. She'd always been the steady one. The calm when everything else spun too fast. Rob was the heartbeat, the big energy, the creative spark that lit every room. But Michelle, she was balance. grace mixed with steel, holding everything together without needing to stand in the spotlight. Jack says thinking about what they must have faced in those final moments is something you can't look at for too long, or it'll pull you under. That kind of darkness doesn't offer answers. It just lingers in the corners. In the days that followed, as more details surfaced and Aaron Sorkin broke down publicly with heartbreak and disbelief, Jack vanished completely from sight. He wasn't processing this as a Hollywood name. He was processing it as a man who'd lost one of his closest friends. And beneath all that grief sat something heavier, a memory he'd buried deep, one that now refused to stay quiet. His tone slows, gets rougher. He admits there was a time, years ago, when something felt off, a signal he brushed aside. He noticed it, felt it, but shrugged it away because life was busy and nothing had gone wrong yet. That's what keeps replaying in his head. Not the headlines, not the gossip, but that one quiet moment where he wonders if speaking up might have changed something. That regret is what finally pushed him to break his silence. Jack says it happened years earlier, Rob's birthday party at the Brentwood house. It was one of those perfect Los Angeles nights. Warm air, soft music, laughter spilling out across the yard. Friends from every era of Rob's life were there. Carl was there too, sharp as ever, holding court with stories that had everyone doubled over with laughter. Jack remembers stepping out to the garden mid-conversation when Nick arrived. The second he saw him, something in his gut tightened. It wasn't anything obvious, no scene, no outburst, but there was a look, a restless tension, fire behind the eyes, the kind of energy that feels like it's searching for something to clash with. Jack had seen that look before, on sets, in bars, sometimes even in his own reflection. Nick wasn't acting wild or reckless. That's what made it more unsettling. It wasn't about substances or a bad night, it was something deeper, like something inside him was always on the edge of boiling over. Later that night, Jack stepped inside to grab a drink. Most of the guests were still out back when he heard sharp voices coming from the den. Not yelling, just clipped, cutting tones that made him stop in his tracks. Then he recognized them, Rob and Nick. Nick was standing over his father, not violent, just towering, his presence alone filling the space. Rob sat in a chair, looking smaller than Jack had ever seen him. Nick was talking fast, about money, about mistakes, about his life, throwing words that landed like punches. The words themselves weren't shocking. The energy was cold, detached, empty. Then Michelle appeared. Calm, grounded. Not a trace of panic. She walked in, placed a gentle hand on Nick's arm, and softly said his name. No lecture, no raised voice, just a mother's touch trying to cool a storm. Nick brushed her off. Not roughly, not loud, but with a sharp, dismissive motion so cold it froze the air in the room. Jack says that moment hit him harder than any shouting could. It wasn't the noise, it was the void. Nick looked at both of his parents, the two people who gave him everything, and there was nothing in his eyes. No connection, no warmth, just emptiness. And Jack describes it like looking into something that absorbs everything and gives nothing back. That's when Rob looked up and saw Jack in the doorway. For a second, just one, Jack saw it all in his friend's face. Shame, fear, exhaustion, and still, beneath it all, love. That impossible, unbreakable love of a father holding on even as it hurts. Rob gave the smallest shake of his head, a silent signal that said everything. Let it go. It's okay. This is our family. And Jack listened. He turned away, walked back outside, and pretended he hadn't seen a thing. Now, sitting decades later, he admits that moment still haunts him more than anything else in his life. He takes a long breath, and for the first time, he removes his sunglasses. His eyes are red, glossy, heavy with guilt. He says he told himself back then that he was respecting Rob's privacy, that he was honoring his hope. But now, he knows that wasn't enough. He says he should have pulled Rob aside, told him the truth, that hope isn't a plan, that love can't fix everything on its own. But who feels right telling another man how to handle his own child? Who tells a father to stop believing in the person he raised? Jack slips the sunglasses back on, voice steadying again. He mentions that Aaron Sorkin later admitted he'd noticed similar tension years before. Jack isn't surprised. He believes plenty of people saw pieces of the same picture. They just didn't want to face it. Everyone sensed the warning signs, but convinced themselves it wasn't serious, that things would smooth out. They saw the smoke and told themselves there was no fire. Jack says that's what hurts the most, that it all came from love. Not neglect, not denial. They wanted to protect Rob's hope because that's what he lived by. They thought that if they just stood by him, if they just believed enough, things would turn out fine. But looking back, Jack says that same faith ended up costing everything. As the conversation drifts toward the present, reality hits like a wall. Nick Reiner now sits in a county facility facing multiple serious charges, with court dates approaching this month. When someone mentions justice, Jack lets out a bitter laugh. He says, "Justice? What does that even mean here?" Locking someone away doesn't rewind time. It doesn't bring Rob or Michelle back. It doesn't erase what happened. It's just numbers on a page trying to measure something that can't be measured. But what surprises people most is the sorrow in Jack's voice when he talks about the children who survived, Roy and Jake. There's pride there, deep respect. He's read their public statement, seen how they focused on love, on memory, on choosing not to let pain turn into hate. Jack says that response says everything about who Rob and Michelle truly were. Even in the middle of something unthinkable, their legacy stayed rooted in compassion, not bitterness. Their children chose grace over anger. They didn't lash out or try to destroy anyone. They protected the memory of their parents, even when it would have been easier to point fingers. That kind of strength doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It's built, piece by piece, in a home filled with love, patience, and lessons that never fade. Jack calls it a reflection of where they came from. A family that tried to keep one devastating act from erasing an entire lifetime of warmth. That's not just hard, it's nearly impossible, but they're doing it. Jack pauses, staring out at the hazy Los Angeles skyline, eyes lost somewhere far beyond the hills. He wonders aloud if maybe that's the only real justice there is, that the good someone leaves behind doesn't vanish just because darkness showed up one day. He says it lives on, in the people who don't break, in the children who keep walking forward with kindness, even when the world gives them every reason to turn bitter. It lives on in the stories that still make people laugh, cry, and feel something real, long after the lights go out. It lives on in the quiet memories held by friends who knew the man behind the camera, who knew the human being behind the name. Jack falls silent again. The recorder still running, catching only the hum of the house and the faint rhythm of the city outside. He doesn't even seem to notice it anymore. He's not giving an interview now. He's just remembering a friend. He finally speaks again, softly. The last time he talked to Rob was about a month before everything changed. Just a normal call. Nothing deep, nothing dramatic. They joked about the Lakers, argued about some movie that had just come out. Regular stuff. Then before hanging up, Rob went quiet for a second. He said something Jack hasn't forgotten since. He told him, "For all the chaos and craziness, we did all right. They made movies. They told stories. They lived." Jack laughed and told him he was right. It was a good life. And that was the last call. Jack stands and walks to the massive window that overlooks the city, his silhouette framed against the golden skyline. He stays there, motionless, facing the same view they both once shared. Los Angeles, beautiful, merciless, glittering with everything it gives and everything it takes. He says Rob always searched for the good in people, even when it hurt him, even when it cost him. And that's what stays with him more than anything else. His voice drifts across the room, soft but steady. He says Rob spent his whole life telling stories about loyalty, friendship, love, and second chances. He believed in happy endings. He believed people were decent deep down, that they could change. That faith was his strength as a storyteller, and the very thing that broke his heart as a father. Jack turns back toward the room, eyes steady now, his face almost still. He says Rob spent decades directing heroes and villains on screen, not realizing the real battle was happening closer than anyone could admit. And that truth, that's the kind no one is ever ready for. Not fame, not success, not experience. Nothing prepares you for that kind of reckoning. Then, without ceremony, it's over. No dramatic farewell, no tears. Just a quiet nod. The kind that means everything's been said. Jack walks away from the window, leaving the light behind him. The image lingers. Jack Nicholson, one of Hollywood's greatest, standing alone in his home above the city, not haunted by his fame or the roles he played, but by the memory of a friend he couldn't protect. The silence returns to Mulholland Drive, but it's not empty anymore. It's heavy, full of everything that was left unsaid for too long. A silence that finally found its voice. And stories like this remind us that behind every spotlight, there are real people, real families, and real consequences. If this story hit you, don't forget to like this video. It helps more than you think. Share it with someone who follows celebrity stories and subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive. There's always more happening behind the scenes, and the truth always runs deeper than the headlines. See you on the next one.